Welcome to the History of Nerds Night podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, author Peter Cozzens, Deadwood. Yes, Deadwood. You know, maybe you're thinking right now, hey, I watched the HBO series. How does this compare? First of all, Peter does not shy away from that. We don't shy away from talking about it in this episode today. What they got right, what they got wrong. There is so much more to cover. And we both love the HBO series, so we're coming at this from a, hey, what else can we uncover here? Love this conversation. If you love the show, I think you're going to love this. Just to prove it to you, I'm going to shut up. Let's bring on Peter. And here we are with author Peter Cozzens, Deadwood, Gold, Guns, and Greed in the American West. Peter, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Appreciate the invitation.
First thing, it was the first thing I thought of. I know a bunch of people who hit play on this. Did you watch the series before you decided to write the book? Was it the series that made you think about writing the book? Because what I really appreciate is you lean right into it. You're not afraid to, name drop the series. What came first for you?
I have to confess, it probably was a combination of things, but the series certainly played a big part in it. I mean, I love the series. I've watched it a couple times now. And, of course, I was curious how much of the story was true and how much was legend and how much had they created out of whole cloth. So there was that aspect. And I also decided after I finished my second to last book, Brutal Reckoning on the Creek War, that kind of completed my trilogy of the Indian Wars of the United States. And I knew I wanted to return to the West and do something in the West again. My buddy Tom Clavin had done really good books on Tombstone and Dodge City, both of which did very well. And I thought, heck, in my mind, Deadwood was the most iconic of the three, and it was certainly unique in a way the others weren't. I guess we can get into that, being a lawless community and all that. And so it was a combination of wanting to go back to the West and having Deadwood in mind for the series. And it seemed like a perfect marriage. Plus, I'd always wanted to explore the Black Hills, so it all kind of came together for me.
Tom has been on the podcast. I'm always a fan. I don't know how he pumps out books the way he does. It's absolutely insane.
I don't either. He pumps out the books himself, and then he also does books in conjunction with his co-author, Bob Drury, who's also a great guy. The two of them together are outstanding as well.
Well, what I find very interesting, and we'll get into the specific details of it, this series, while not perfect, we certainly wouldn't say that it's, exactly true life. I found it shocking that there was more of it that was correct historically than there is that isn't. I mean, a lot of times when you watch a Hollywood show, it's like maybe 1% actually true. But I mean, especially, the death of Wild Bill, it seems like they pulled that straight off the historical page. Is that what you were expecting when you started kind of researching back and forth on this? Or were you kind of like, hey, I have no idea what's going to happen here?
Well, I think in a number of places they did take liberties. And I think that the true story is actually more engaging and more evocative than the HBO series story, in part because this was a real story. This is what really happened. I think that HBO did an outstanding job with the atmospherics. Creating the filth, the muck, the kind of the claustrophobic feeling of being in this narrow town in a gulch with high bluffs on either side. They got the essence of most of the people correct, even though they took some liberties with the particulars of their lives. They got the essence right. And of course, all legend has its basis in fact to some degree or another. And I think they did a good job of sifting through that. I think I did a better job since I was telling the true story, but no, they did a good job.
Well, I think something that really isn't in this series, and you really kind of dig into this, is just how Deadwood kind of comes to be at all, right? It's already kind of somewhat up and running when the series starts, whereas you got to go back, because this is one of those books that when people are like, oh, I would have loved to have visited the Old West, and it's like, no, you would not have. And here's why. When they say Deadwood was an illegal town, that it shouldn't have even been there, and especially when you're talking about indigenous Indians in the area, was Deadwood even supposed to have anybody there, so to speak?
No, Deadwood was, and in fact, all the settlements in the Black Hills, of which Deadwood was by far the largest and the most significant, they were intrinsically illegal. and lawless. I mean, you had lawlessness in places like Tombstone and Dodge City, but they were legitimate communities on territorial or state soil. Deadwood was erected on the part of the Great Sioux Reservation. The Black Hills had been awarded to the Lakota by treaty in 1868 in perpetuity. And so the presence of whites in the Black Hills was completely in conflict with the treaty and the U.S. government's obligations to preserve it for the Lakota Indians.
Especially people talk about, stolen land and everything that happened with Manifest Destiny. This is one of those places in American history where I look at it and say, white people were not supposed to be there. Like the law, the agreements, everything. And it was just impossible to keep people out. And that's, especially for Deadwood, it was just basically people are going to go no matter what we do. They sent the army out there, right, to try and get everybody out. And it's just, you can't stop progress sometimes in the worst possible ways.
That's true. I mean, the government did make an effort. I, of course, go into this in the books. As you alluded to, I spend a lot of time on the antecedents of Deadwood, on the plight of the Lakota Indians and the discovery of gold by George Armstrong Custer, Lakota culture, so on and so forth. The government made what it considered to be a good faith effort to purchase the Black Hills, but the price the government was offering was far lower than what the Lakota would take for it. The reservation Lakotas were willing to sell the Black Hills, but the so-called traditional Lakotas, or the roaming bands of Sitting Bull, Gall, Crazy Horse, they did not want to part with the Black Hills under any circumstances. I mean, it was inevitable that the Black Hills would be lost to Indians, and again, the reservation chiefs recognized that. They just wanted to get the most out of it they could. The traditional chiefs knew they would have to fight, but were willing to do so to try to preserve that way of life and that land.
And for the way Deadwood really kind of started as a town, they say like something sprang up overnight, almost literal when it came to Deadwood, right? How did all of a sudden these people decide, hey, we're all going, pack up and let's go?
It was pretty remarkable. In fact, one pioneer of Deadwood who lived into the 20th century likened it to living in a motion picture where a month seemed like 10 months and a year seemed like 10 years because so much happened, so much was compressed in a short period of time. And the first gold was discovered in Deadwood Creek by a couple of miners in July 1875. They came back with a few of their buddies in December 1875. And by April 1876, there were already 200 businesses in place, false front buildings going up. I mean, it was just dizzying, the pace at which they were building. I just can't even imagine it. And of course, all this was done, without any regulation, without any thought to order. It was a chaos of construction and with that layer of lawlessness over the top of it.
Well, it's very funny because we don't have enough time to actually go over everything that you have jammed in this book, but I remember I'm getting towards the end and I'm thinking, man, they did a lot in 10 years. And then you say it, by the way, everything I just told you happened within 18 months, 2 years. I mean, when we talk about just jamming everything in there, this is not 50 years of Deadwood. It's really just absolutely explodes. And a lot of the things that we see in the show and that we hear about is all in a pretty compressed timeline because these towns could disappear just as fast as they popped up, right?
Right. The Deadwood of popular imagination, the Wild West Deadwood, lasted from early 1876 until the Great Deadwood Fire in September 1879, which coincided with the playing out of so-called placer mines, which is, for those who don't understand it, placer mining is what you associate with the old timers and the pans and getting gold from the surface of the earth or a foot or two down. Those mines were starting to run their course. By the fall of 1879, people were moving out in Deadwood looking for new diggings elsewhere in the West. A lot of the lawless element was following the miners out. So Deadwood was already starting to, and industrial mining was taking hold in the area. Big capital, deep, hard rock mining was starting to take hold. That's a whole different story than the placer mining. Much more industrialized, much less romantic, quite frankly. And so it all came crashing to an end in September 1879 with the fire. The town rebuilt, but even after it was rebuilt in early 1880, interestingly, people in Deadwood sensed that something had passed, that they had lost something, that the wild pioneer days were over, because there was a 6-month long column in the Black Hills Daily Times called Early Days. And it was accounts by the old timers. That is to say, people who'd been in Deadwood for 4 years, as if they were trying to preserve this and recognize there was something unique here worth preserving.
So wait, Peter, you're telling me that people who really didn't think it through and just threw up a bunch of wooden buildings fire took it out? That doesn't sound right. It's almost like city planning is an important part of things.
Well, the newspapers in town were constantly harping on the business element and others to, come on, we got to kick in money for fire prevention. Let's get some hoses. Let's get some fire carts. Let's get moving here. The so-called fire fiend is going to get us sooner or later. And there were this kind of shows really the limits of community in the West and community anywhere, that people were in Deadwood to make money. Some thought in terms of the longer perspective, others not. And to get the people together and united behind some kind of a community firefighting effort was impossible. And in fact, this first issue after the fire, the editor of the Black Hills Daily Times said, "We told you so."
Always makes people popular when you call everybody
exactly,
out like that.
Yeah. I said he was lucky there had never been a lynching in Deadwood, because that kind of a remark is not guaranteed to win friends.
Well, let's talk about some of the characters. I'm sure people want to talk about them, and we'll get to Al Swearingen and Seth Bullock. But I just think this person, and you tell me as an author, you've written about like Andrew Jackson. You've written about all of these amazing people. To me, Calamity Jane is one of the most complex characters in American history. I'm going to say it big. Am I full of it, Peter? Am I completely wrong, or do you at least somewhat agree with me?
Well, the celebrity she became looms large in American history, looms large in Western folklore. The person she was, which I think comes out in my book, didn't necessarily merit that celebrity. She was, and particularly telling were references that I found in newspapers from Deadwood about her in the late 1870s when this was all happening. I mean, things like an idiotic whore of the lowest level, things like that. I mean, she was essentially an alcoholic prostitute. She was only 20 to 21 years old when all this was happening. I mean, she was very young. She had a very rough upbringing. She started in prostitution at age 12. She was orphaned. But she also had a gift for self-promotion, and she had a really good heart. I mean, when Deadwood was struck with a smallpox epidemic in 1876, she was the only person beside one of the doctors in town who would nurse smallpox patients. And of course, you have to give her a lot of credit for that. She also stood up for other prostitutes who were being taken advantage of by their clients. She did wear buckskin, carry firearms. She had associated with soldiers so long that she was good on horseback, knew how to shoot, knew how to herd. So she had that aspect too, but 90% of the time she was a drunken prostitute. The way she achieved celebrity, that's a whole, I go into that, of course, in great detail in the book. That's a whole story in itself, how dime novelists picked up on her and newspapers picked up on her and turned her into something that she never really was, to this frontier heroine of sorts, who was, involved with stagecoach robbers and involved in protecting women who'd been subject to abuse and to rape. Just this really dramatic character that she never really was. And in fact, Deadwood newspapers, when these stories of her began to appear in the press and in dime novels, they were just mystified. They say, "This is the same Calamity Jane that we know stumbling around the streets of Deadwood." It was a mystery to them.
It feels like to me, if she's sober and I'm sick, I want her around. Probably drinks 1 through 4. She's going to tell some great stories. We're going to have a good time. and then you need to get as far away from her as possible because it's all going downhill from there.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the Black Hills papers, when they were talking about her celebrity, they mentioned that one of the reporters had seen her the night before in Chinatown with a bloody nose stumbling about. And the reporter asked her, "Where are you going, Calamity?" And she replied, "God only knows. I sure don't." And the paper said, and this is the kind of heroine Calamity Jane is.
Well, let's talk about somebody that's probably mostly villain. Al Swearingen. Yeah, like he's... this is when you see it on paper, and especially the way you present it, and they're all facts and everything. He's a lot harder to like at all, I think, when you see him in reality. What did you think when you were doing it?
Oh, absolutely. He, at least in the HBO series, he had a few redeeming qualities that peeked through from time to time. The real life Al Swearingen had none. I mean, not only did he run underage prostitutes and beat women and run a questionable saloon, but he was married in real life, and he forced his wife to help him in procuring women. And if they didn't, of course, he beat her. I mean, he had nothing good about him whatsoever in real life. And the interesting thing, too, as an aside, Ian McEwan did a great job playing him in the series, but was about 25 years too old for the real Al Swearingen. Swearingen was only in his late 20s when he's engaged in all this nefarious behavior in Deadwood. I mean, these guys, all of them, they were much younger than they appear in the series.
And then, Seth Bullock and Saul Starr, a lot easier to like. It's a little bit more complicated. I think they do a good job in the series, but I think in the book as well, Seth's kind of one of those guys, wants to be part of the town, but, sometimes steps on the wrong toes and things of that nature. I always find it, as you had mentioned before, just the real story, the real people. It's great because this isn't a screenwriter saying, here's what I think this person is like. You get to see what they've done, and you're like, hey, this is who I'm actually looking at. Did you have any surprises as far as those two were concerned?
Seth Bullock, I mean, I was happy to see that he wasn't a womanizer, didn't cheat on his wife or have a long-term affair. He was very devoted to his wife. They had a wonderful marriage. She was a dynamic presence herself when she came to Deadwood. I found him to be my favorite character in the book. Just a real stand-up guy who he had his faults, but they were vastly outweighed by his attributes. And he and Saul Starr were prominent among those who wanted to make Deadwood a long-term running concern and wanted to bring law and order to the town. Now, they both had their political aspirations that a well-settled and lawful Deadwood would help further, but they genuinely wanted law and order for its own sake as well.
Well, especially in these Wild West towns, there was always that push and pull, because especially the people who first showed up, they wanted what they considered true freedom, which is no government, I'm on my own. And then with basically all of them, sooner or later, people coming in and start saying, you can't live like this forever. You need to have neighbors. You need to have some sort of support system. And I mean, Deadwood's kind of a perfect microcosm of that as anywhere else, right? Is that we want progress, but we want to keep our freedom. And oh, by the way, the government may come in one day and say, get the heck out of here. You aren't even supposed to exist right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Deadwood's a microcosm of the West and of the American way of life, a microcosm of the play between avarice and greed and the desire for a greater good and a greater society. I think that's one of the lessons that can be taken from the book, from the Deadwood story, and applied today.
Now, the thing that blew my mind, didn't know anything about this, couldn't believe it, and I'm not going to say that Deadwood was perfect, but there was a good-sized black population, a good-sized Chinese population. What were race relations like in Deadwood between all of these different groups of people?
Within the context of the time, they were exceptionally good, and that's one of the things that surprised me in my research. The Chinese, in particular, were a larger presence of the two. There were only maybe 40 blacks in Deadwood, but there was a pretty vibrant Chinatown, between 200 and 250 people, and they had a segment of Main Street that was Chinatown. Elsewhere in the West at the time, the Chinese were excoriated. There was a movement in California to ban Chinese in the United States, and not just in California, but first and foremost there, to make life unendurable for the Chinese so that they would leave. Crimes against Chinese normally went unpunished, include murder. Chinese in most places in the West were prohibited from owning property. And in Deadwood, that wasn't true. Chinese were permitted to own property. Chinese were well treated. In the few instances when violent acts were committed against Chinese by whites, the perpetrators were hauled before the courts in Deadwood and were held accountable. And that was kind of refreshing to see that. I don't entirely yet know the reason why we had this atmosphere of tolerance in Deadwood. I think it's part of maybe the larger atmosphere of tolerance that came with initially a legal town that's kind of like anything sort of goes. But also there's a darker side to it, and that is that the Chinese ran the opium dens. And not only prostitutes or the lower strata of Deadwood patronized the opium dens, but also some of Deadwood's better citizens. So you're not going to cut off your source of supply and recreation, for instance. I think that played a part in it too. Now, in terms of the black population, similarly to the Chinese, the blacks knew better than to try to compete in jobs that might step on white people's feet. So generally the blacks were in the, hotel porters or had small businesses of their own, like the Chinese. They knew the limitations they couldn't push beyond. But even so, again, Deadwood was pretty welcome.
I mean, especially like you said, there was at least a chance of justice if something was done wrong to somebody, which for that time period is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
The next major significant thing, was Deadwood the best cussing town in the United States? I mean, could anybody cuss the way Deadwoodites could cuss? I mean, I don't know how to put this on a scale or something, but I think they'd have to be high up there, right?
Oh, yeah. And I wasn't sure how much of that was exaggerated in the series. But in the course of my research, I realized, no, that's the way they talk. In fact, again, I harken back to one of the newspaper editors because I read every single newspaper that came out of Deadwood in the 1870s, in addition to papers from all over the country that talked about Deadwood. And one of the editors said, there is a blue law in Dakota Territory that if a lawman hears somebody cussing, they can charge them a $1 fine. If we were to apply that here in Deadwood, we'd probably be adding $20,000 a day to the county coffers. It was widely recognized.
Something that's come up, and you've mentioned it almost in every answer, and I think people do forget this, it is part of the series. Newspapers were so important, right? Even though Deadwood wasn't, the size of New York City or anything, they had multiple papers. And they really went to war with each other, right? I mean, this is not an insignificant part of everyone's daily life, was you had to grab the paper, otherwise you may not know what's going on at all.
No, newspapers were central to everyone's lives. I mean, not only for the news, but also for the advertisements. Everything from sheriff sales to liquidations to local news to national news to gossip, and apart from it being a principal form of entertainment as well. I mean, newspapers really were front and center in people's lives. And at one point, there were 3 newspapers in Deadwood, all of which were vibrant concerns. For the entire time period we're talking about, there were 2 papers, and they went at one another when it came to election time. They were very partisan. One was Democrat, one was Republican. And above and beyond that, they just enjoyed it chiding one another. So it was really fun reading the 2 in concert and see how they went back and forth. And of course, when they did agree on something, you knew it was probably the truth.
If I could send you back in time, how long do you think you could stay in Deadwood before either, you probably got smallpox or got shot or something? How long do you think you can be in Deadwood safely before you were starting to really push your luck?
A couple of days. I mean, if nothing else, the stench would drive me out. The absolute lack of any sort of sanitation would have driven me out very quickly. The streets were cesspools. I hope I convey that in the book. I try to engage people's sense of smell in the book. And I mean, the streets were just filled with animal waste, human waste through sewers backing up, offal and trash thrown in people's yards. I mean, the smell was horrific. And Deadwoodites do talk about that. And it was even bad for the late 19th century. And it wasn't until the town had been up and running for a few months before they even had a public bathhouse. So it was pretty grim. Sanitation was pretty grim.
All right, I'm going to send you back in time without your sense of smell. And you get to interview one person from the book for an hour. And I promise they will also not take out a firearm and shoot you. So you're totally safe for that hour. And they're going to tell you the absolute truth, even if they're drunk. Who are you going to pick from the book to talk to?
Al Swearingen.
I thought that would be it. Was it either going to be him or Seth? I wasn't sure, but why Al?
I think it would just be entertaining to see what made somebody as evil as him tick.
Especially if he's going to tell you the truth. I have a feeling that childhood was not fantastic.
Yeah.
And is it hard, especially, there's a few people in here where it's kind of hard to know. As a history writer, do you get really frustrated when you just can't find those pieces? Because, especially when you're talking about the Wild West, there are certain people that just seem to come out of nowhere, and we're probably never going to know where they came from, what specifically makes them tick. Is that kind of interesting for you to try and present what you can? Or are you always thinking, if I look at one more book, maybe I'll get the answer?
After a point, you have to stop your research. Otherwise, you'd be researching forever and never write a book. So at some point, you got to call it quits. It can be frustrating. On the other hand, I think I have the ability to dance around and what I don't know and make the most of what I do know. And, the internet's made it so much easier to learn about people's sites, like some of these graveyard and burial sites where I can go back and see where these people, for instance, I wasn't sure how to spell Swearingen's last name. I've seen it spelled two different ways. So I went on Find a Grave and located not only his grave, but also that of his brother and others in the family. And I had the definitive spelling. A lot of these resources on the internet have made digging into the past of some of these people a lot easier than it otherwise would have been. And of course, family members will write about these people. Descendants will write about them. And so you learn more than you would have, say, 25 years ago doing the research. The best, apart from newspapers, the best single source I had were the papers of Seth Bullock, which Yale University acquired early on in the pandemic. So I ended up being the first person to have access to them. And they were a gold mine. Everything from his letters to back and forth to South Star when they were away from one another, to all his papers when he was sheriff and acting marshal, deputy territorial marshal. This stuff is a gold mine. Even something as arcane as an inventory of the fixtures and furnishings of the Gem Saloon were in there. Which allowed me to really bring the place back to life, because hey, here's the actual inventory. I know what's in there.
Well, that's the other side of the coin, right? Stuff where you can't find it. And then, that's got to be like Christmas morning, something where you're like, nobody else has had access to this to write the story, and you're first in. I just assume that you're flying high for at least 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, absolutely. I was soaring with that. And at that town of Deadwood, the papers that Yale didn't acquire, residual the town of Deadwood acquired, and they gave me a heads up when they got them. So I was able to get the whole picture, all 100% of Seth Bullock's papers.
Now, did you at any point travel to Deadwood just to see what it's like out there?
Oh, heck, I spent a lot of time out there. I made it a point. Not only was I in Deadwood, and you can see everything there is to see in Deadwood in one long day, but they have a tremendous archives there. The organization is called Deadwood History Incorporated. They run the 3 museums, and they also have a tremendous archives. And if you look at my bibliography, you'll see a half a page of primary sources that I got from the Deadwood archives. But not only did I go to Deadwood, but I hiked up Black Elk Peak, the tallest peak in the Black Hills. I hiked up Bear Butte, another sacred Indian site on the periphery of the hills. I hiked a number of hiking trails just through the hills just to get a feel for it. I visited every single stage robbery site that is known of, every site of an Indian massacre, every stage station site. I drove down to Cheyenne and drove back so I understand what the immigrant trail was like to Deadwood. I spent probably a total of about 5 weeks out there altogether.
Just to be sure, though, you didn't actually use a covered wagon at the time.
No. And I didn't walk like a lot of the guys did.
Well, listen, we talked about research. Lord knows you got to read a lot for research. But do you have time to read nonfiction for fun? Or do you have any friends who have books coming out that you want to plug them?
I would plug Paul Hedren's recent book, The Undiscovered Country, which I reviewed for the Wall Street Journal very, very favorably. And it's a wonderful history of the American West in the largest sense of the word, starting with the first settlers to pour over the Appalachian Mountains all the way through to Wounded Knee and the closing of the frontier. And he does it with using as a vehicle mini biographies of 7 or 8 people, and does it very, very well. So I would anybody who wants to refresh their knowledge of the West in general, or doesn't have a good general knowledge of the West, that's a book worth buying. And also Mark Lee Gardner, who's a really great Western writer, has got a dual biography of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday coming out in a few weeks. That should be pretty good, too.
I love that I can tell you I've already read and reviewed both.
Okay.
So you nailed it. We're very simpatico on this one.
Outstanding.
One of the reasons we have History Nerds United is some people like history is boring. Why would I read your book? I can just go watch the HBO series. Now, you and I both know that they're missing out on a lot. So if I got one of those folks in front of you and they said, hey, Peter, why should I read Deadwood? What would you say?
Because a real story is better than fiction. It's more entertaining than fiction. I think people will have a good time reading it. I had a better time writing this book than any other book I've written. I just had a blast writing this book. I mean, I was chuckling at times when I was writing it. It's just a great story. There's much more to Deadwood than you'll see in the series as well.
Well, Peter, I totally agree. And by the way, they can do both. They don't have to pick one
exactly.
or the other.
Do both.
I say start with the book, though. And again, this is coming from somebody who loves the series as well. I think you nailed it. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode. Peter, thank you so much. Deadwood, if you've seen the show, if you haven't seen the show, this book is for everybody. You're going to learn so much. It's awesome. Get it. In the meantime, hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.